Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of cross-cultural smoothie. And again, I just want to thank all the viewers for joining the call from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us on a wonderful evening on a Friday. And today we have some special guests. Our friend that I will introduce in a few minutes. But I just want to go ahead and encourage you to use the chat, whether you're joining us from YouTube or Facebook. Please put your question and comments there so that our guests will answer that to the best of their ability. And also, because this is a live and public event, I also want to ask you and encourage you to be mindful. So without further ado, let's roll it. So Brian and Choma, thank you guys for joining us tonight. And this is an episode where we want to talk about cross-cultural identity. But before we jump into that, I think every story has a beginning, and I think some people may be curious here to go back to the genesis of how you guys met. And when you met, were you aware that you guys were, different, black and white? So the floor is yours.
Good question. Well, I guess I'll start. So we worked for the same nonprofit Christian organization. And so we actually met at a conference and yes, the conferences. And so so I had just gotten back from Nigeria, actually. I'd been living in Nigeria for 2 or 3 months. And when I got back, I was at this conference and was just starting work. And so I was talking to someone at the conference and, this guy was kind of like going on and on about like all of these really good things about Africa, and was like very kind of like romanticizing Africa. And I had just gotten back from Nigeria and I'd seen like some of the complexity of like being in Nigeria, but it's like, I love Nigeria, but then the Nigerian government is like kind of corrupt. And so I was like dealing with all these like feelings and he was just going on about like, Africa's this wonderful place. And he wasn't even like naming any countries, and then all of a sudden, like Brian came over and he was like, do you ever get frustrated when people are romanticizing Africa? And I was like, yes, I do. and so then we just started talking. And I mean, this was like the first time I'd met or ever seen him. And we sat and talked for, probably a good hour. So that's my memory.
That's right. Awesome. Thank you, Choma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it was kind of rude the way I said that to that guy. I don't know what like got me to do that in the moment. I'm usually very polite, but I guess maybe I wanted to talk to you. I always say that the first thing that I noticed about Choma was her melodious voice. So it was very beautiful, and I heard it behind me, and I turned around because it sounded like, like your parents have like adult friends when you're growing up, and there's kind of like an aunt-like figure in my home. And when I heard Choma's voice, her voice sounded exactly like my favorite aunt. And I was like, why does she sound like my favorite aunt? And then I was very curious about her. She was a staff at the time, and I was still my 3rd year of college. So I'm about a year and a half younger than Choma. But that made me want to talk to her, I guess. And so then I scared the other man away, I suppose.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, guys. And I know Choma said earlier that she's a first generation Nigerian American, meaning that your parents are both from Nigeria, but you were born here in the States. Brian, what is your background?
Yeah, I have a variety of different European ethnicities in my history, like England, Ireland, Scotland, Germany, and one of my great-grandparents immigrated from Russia and has Jewish heritage, which showed up in some of the food culture and identity in our home.
Thank you. Yeah. And I guess, again, you guys, one of the things that I was wondering, you guys got married 6 years ago? No.
Yeah, 6. April 5th will be 7.
Yeah, and you guys were in Missouri, and that was right before the incident of Ferguson happened.
Yep, right.
So what was it like for you, just thinking as an interracial marriage during that time of social injustice in St. Louis, Missouri, or Ferguson?
I think it was the first time. I remember us sitting in our first apartment, realizing I had never been to a protest, and realizing like I think we need to protest. And I'd never really thought about that before. The organization that we were part of is a bit unique. It was very focused on kind of combating racism and being against racism. So I'd gotten some good training that I hadn't heard before I ever got to college about, racism is real, it's a problem, we need to learn to have relationships cross-culturally, and we had some basic cross-cultural training. But I'd never realized the depth to which racism really affected society, and a much bigger and more, I guess, I didn't realize how deep the roots went until we saw that happen and saw friends and family begin to react, how the police were reacting in our city. It all really affected us. It affected me a lot, I should say.
Yeah.
You want to add some, Choma?
Yes. So yeah, all of what Brian said is true. And I mean, it was like, it's kind of interesting thinking back that it happened like right at the beginning of our marriage, because it did really shape a lot of how we talk about race in our family, and the importance of talking about it and dealing with it. I think like when I just found out that I was pregnant with our first son, Samuel, that happened as well. So like, I'm over here thinking like, Black young boy, you get, shot and killed by the police. And, I'm here processing like, am I about to have a son? So these were just like really important conversations. And, we had to make a lot of decisions. Like I was pregnant and going to protest and, thinking about like my safety, like we had to work out, because like here he is, never had gone to a protest. And like, I'm like, of course we need to protest. And so, it's like, but of course we have our first baby and like thinking like, my safety, so like all of those.
It was freezing outside.
It was very cold outside. Sometimes there were just like people smoking, just like secondhand smoke, just little things as you're pregnant, like having to think about. So that was, we had to work those things out. But yeah, I think it really shaped our view of how race needed to be confronted in our lives and in our marriage, and going forward in our family with our kids.
Well, thank you guys for sharing. And for those of the viewers here who don't know you guys, I think like you guys have just been a blessing to me personally, because it was by meeting Brian at a conference in San Antonio 6 years ago that I got to meet my wife. So just you guys have been an encouragement to me. And my wife is also white, for some of the viewers there who don't know my wife, Alison. So you guys have been very encouraging to me. And I think, as with your cultural heritage, Choma, and Brian, your European heritage, one of the things that have always fascinated me is that you guys have decided to embrace each other's last name. So why are you guys named the way you guys are named?
Well, so it was, I will say Brian was, I like my last name. I love my last name. So I was thinking like, oh, I hope like it's okay when we get to that conversation if I just like add his last name to mine. And so I would be Chukwu Smith. And I expected him to stay Brian Smith. But he was like, what? Why? Like, why wouldn't I change my name too? So he has his own thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me with my own worldview to kind of continue to interact with things as though I was like kind of taking Choma into my own family.
Mm.
You know, like we're Christians, so in the Bible it says a man's supposed to leave his own family to go be with his wife. And so it was part of me saying, oh yeah, like we're becoming a new family. And so the old family that I was part of, the Smith family, I'm leaving behind. And so I'm changing my last name to something new.
Thank you. That's very inspiring. So that's why you come by your name as Chukwu Smith. So you made a new culture from your name. Awesome. I love creativity. So, and I also know like you guys have lived outside of the United States. You guys have lived in Japan. So what was it like to be an interracial couple in Japan?
Yeah. I think there were a lot of things that, came up. Like, I think that one of them, and Brian will probably talk more about this, but just, it felt like we were often more on the same team, like from a public perspective, than we would be like in the US, like at least like from my perspective, it was like people were like, oh, there's that American couple, and versus like in the States, it's very much like, oh, there's that interracial couple, and so it's so it's it was different, and in some like refreshing ways. I think like there was still kind of a fascination with there's a fascination I think like with Americans, and so like we were treated very well. And then like there are also, because of some of the Western ideas that are perpetuated throughout the world, like there were still negative stereotypes about me that I think I would like see, like there would be times that there was one time that I went to the park with Samuel and, like everyone just left, and it was just a very kind of like shocking experience. And I will say that was like a pretty rare experience. I think my experience of racism in the US is, a lot higher, but
wow.
There were a few times.
That's a good point, Choma. And I think sometimes when like for me being like American but Cameroonian, I feel like the concept of racism like usually is kind of like non-existent when I go home. So sometimes I wonder if some people should consider going elsewhere where they will be welcome if they want to avoid some of those comments and stuff. What about you, Mr. Brian? What was your experience like in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Choma said, I think is true. I was surprised. People say things about a country before you go there, and it really reveals their attitudes. So people would say things like, oh, Japan is a very racist country. Like, watch out when you go there. And I just remember being so surprised by like, it's true, like there's attitudes about whiteness and blackness, but like Choma said, I think the ones that were there mostly seemed like they had come from American movies. And so the kind of like, I see you as black first, or I see you as white first, was something stronger in the US to me, whereas in Japan, I just felt like a foreigner.
Right.
And I just had to be a foreigner with very light skin. Like, so that was a part of it. And I think being outside of my own country also gave me the experience of being displaced, which makes you reflect on your own identity a lot. One of the things that I started realizing while I was there was that I didn't have to call myself white. Kind of looking in from the outside of America and kind of seeing how the world was looking at America, I started thinking, like, who am I? Like, why do I call myself white? Like, where did that idea come from? Why do I let people call me white? And I came up with a new name for myself. I decided I wanted to call myself European diaspora because it's more accurate to me, and it doesn't represent the history of people trying to elevate themselves as better than other people. Whiteness is. So I decided, like, oh, my ancestors are from Europe, and I'm not living there right now. So I'm in European diaspora. which just felt very freeing to me. And there was a lot of other things that I started to realize about myself. But to me, a lot of our experience in Japan felt very freeing to me. And not everything. There were still some hard parts, but it was. I don't know. I have a lot of stories I could share. Like, okay, here's one. Like when we went to a daycare, I expected that maybe Samuel might feel otherized because he's a foreigner baby. And he was maybe 2 or 3 years old. And so we were nervous. We took a friend with us from Japan and had them sit down and kind of talk to the daycare. And we'd heard really good things about them. Like these women are really wonderful at what they do. They're very great daycare providers. And we were so nervous. So we said, okay, if someone looks at our child and maybe like touches his hair or makes him feel strange or like he doesn't fit in, we would really prefer if you could talk to him about it and help him to express his feelings. Even if, he's not able to express his ideas very well yet, he's only 3. And if he's having any hard feelings, try to help him, move past those feelings in a healthy way and express how he's feeling about it. And, in the US, my expectation would have been that if I had said that to a teacher, that they would have been very defensive. And they would no, that would never happen here. We're not that kind of a daycare. All the kids here are very nice. Like no one here is racist. That response is what I was used to. So I was very nervous about how they would respond. And instead, what the teacher said was she looked at us and she said, oh, yes, we can't guarantee that nothing like that would ever happen. But if it does, we will, of course, try to do whatever it is you've asked us to do. And that's it. And I remember just being so grateful that she was going to go out of her way to make accommodations for us as foreigners, that she wasn't going to make it seem better than it was. She was like, yeah, unfortunately, something otherizing might happen. But of course, we would help your child to express his feelings. So that was very touching to me as a dad. And you're always thinking about your kids, and it meant a lot to me. So,
wow. So you kind of felt like maybe you were your culture were, you kind of felt like you were more welcome and embraced in Japan, and you had less hostility than in your own country. Wow, that's very cool to know. Thank you for sharing. We have a question here from YouTube. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name not the appropriate way. It's Iroki Yuda. And Iroki Yuda's question is it legal in the United States to have 2 last names? Is it just like a social media name that you guys are using, or this is a name that you guys have on your, IDs? So Iroki, please also let us know from where you're from and what is the case, in your country, if you can have more than 2 last names. But thank you so much again for your question. So back to you, Brian and Choma. Is this just like a social media name, or this is your official name on passport?
We're caught red-handed. So it's not illegal. Hi, Hiroki, by the way.
Hiroki.
Good to see you.
Oh, Hiroki, thank you. You guys have a Japanese.
Yeah, so it's not illegal. I actually accidentally got it changed on my driver's license and caused a big problem for myself because I didn't do it at the Social Security office. I've actually had a lot of problems from various different points because I tried to change my last name, and it's uncommon in the US for men to change their name.
Yeah.
So, I had to figure out where I was supposed to go to get my name changed. And I finally figured it out. I tried going there once. I still have to go back with the paperwork. So maybe
we're thinking for our 7-year anniversary.
That's right.
We'll get it really just official and legal. But the answer to the question is it is legal, and it's
allowed.
something. Yes, it's allowed in the U.S. And I sign everything Chukwu Smith still. And I just have to we just have some paperwork still to do that we haven't done. So
yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think again, as we think of creating culture, creating new culture, when everyone brings his culture, I think your names are just a beautiful example of that mesh of cultures. So that's really cool. So, Brian, in terms of like, I think cultural identity, I think sometimes identity is shaped like we have this proverb that says that a tree grows where it's planted. So, as you guys are trying to create your culture, do you guys are intentional about settings like social setting or schools like churches or a neighborhood, those kind of things that may shape, your family? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're intentional. I think, I mean, as a dad, I often feel very protective of my kids. So if I go to a church and I see somebody kind of like otherizing a child's hair and it's not being carefully monitored or, supervised, to me, that doesn't seem like a place that I want to bring my child. And I don't really want to expose them to that feeling of like otherizing when they're not supervised by us. So that's a big. I think also I've had to realize that there's some experiences that I just have never had that my son is going to have. So as a dad, sometimes you have this impulse to be like, oh, like I'm gonna, raise my son and tell him what it means to be a man and help him really feel like he belongs in the world. But there are some things like when I drive a car that are going to be different for him that I've never experienced. And when I see a police officer approaching my car, it might feel very different from him in a way that I've never experienced. So one of the things that I've tried to get my head around very early was that it would take a community of men more than just myself to help raise him. So like trying to make sure that he has a good relationship with his uncles, like Choma's brothers, and identifying other men in the congregations that we're part of, or just people in his life that are going to be an adult figure for him and a role model and somebody who can help interpret his experiences. I think it's just really important. So that's been one thing that I think about a lot. I think there's more I could say. In particular, I think when we think about like our family values, it's important to me to recognize that what feels like halfway to me may not in reality be a halfway of a new culture. Because Choma's living in the US and her Nigerian family had to figure out how to live in a largely white America from day one. And I didn't grow up in a Nigerian America, having to figure out what it means to relate to Nigerians all the time. So it feels much more different for me when I visit her family. And when I visit, it's usually only for a few weeks. So I just kind of, figure out my way along for a couple of weeks and then I come back home. So I think I've had to realize that when we're doing things at home, it might feel much more difficult for me, or like I'm going much further than I realized I would have to, making a new family culture.
Thank you.
There are some things. My phone alarm might wake our child up.
What about you, boss lady, in terms of like social places or structure, or as a lawyer, or even like as you educate like your kids? Are you intentional about what they read, what they watch, and how can you help us?
Yeah, 100%. Like I think, it seems almost like basic now, but it's like so many books with representation, so many TV shows with representation, all of it. It's just a really big deal to have like, Black people in books that we read, like, and themes also. Like since Samuel was like 2, we have the book Chocolate Me, which like talks about, white kids making fun of a Black kid's hair, or Black kid's nose, like his skin, calling his skin like dirt, and like the Black boy kind of processing that with his mom, so like that's just like ingrained in Samuel's mind. And so like as soon as he saw that, like, and sometimes he was a little confused, like when he saw some white kids just being mean to his little Black friend. You know, he was like, they were being racist. And, you know, they were little kids and it might not have been an actual like racist incident. He just could identify in the book, you know, he like knows the word, and we're being intentional about him knowing what racism looks like, so that when he experiences it, he can verbalize that. So that's important.
Thank you. And Brian, you made a good point. Like, you just want other men, you know, to be involved in your boy's life, like Choma's uncles. But I think, like we say, it takes a village to raise a child, and it also takes a village to discipline a child, you know. And we know, like, settings like schools, you know, places of worship, you know, maybe they may not be aware of those differences as how you feel as a parent, or even the feeling of a child, because they're used to the majority culture if it's in a white majority setting, you know. So what message do you have for, you know, those childcare providers, whether it's in church or in schools or just in the community, like in terms of awareness or maybe even like training? What do you want them to know about interracial kids, like attention or care?
Well, I mean, one thing practically for me as a dad, like I mentioned with the Japanese daycare providers, is it takes a lot for a parent to bring up an issue with, you know, a place of worship or a teacher. And so I don't just lightly go around trying to confront teachers and childcare providers. So if I bring something up, like at church one time, there was a woman who just like kind of instinctively reached out and tried to grab at Samuel's hair. And don't do that. Why are you doing that? And, you know, she was defensive, and it was kind of, you know, strange. And, you know, sometimes they bring up like relatives that they have that are also minorities. And this is just so complicated. Like, if somebody brings something up with you, it's not because they're just trying to be strange. Like, they just care about their kid. And so entertain the conversation and listen to them rather than being defensive. I think that would go a long way. I mean, showing stories with representation is a big deal. And teaching kids, like, I'm a big fan of routine. It's hard for me to do something if it's not part of my routine. When I pray for my son every night, I pray that he love himself. And like kind of teaching kids to love themselves and to appreciate themselves. You know, maybe like big concepts might kind of go over a child's head, but they know to love themselves. You know, those kinds of things are easy, simple things. But I think, you know, the biggest thing as a parent that helps me is knowing that I have the freedom to communicate with a daycare provider or teacher, and that they're not just going to kind of be defensive and try to justify themselves.
Thank you, Brian. Choma, do you have any advice, or you just think like you will use your hands, or like, because sometimes experience is the best teacher, when you have, you know, told people, I don't touch my kid's head, and they keep doing that.
It's an interesting dynamic in our relationship because, I mean, we laugh sometimes, like, between us, because, like, white people, it's like, so it's like we as Black Americans, like, have been experiencing some sense of, like, you know, oppression, racism, like, you know, throughout our lives. We've experienced microaggressions. We've learned how to move past them or confront them, like operate around them, you know, like, so it's just like, it's interesting because like, like Brian is working with privilege, right? So like, so he is, when someone messes like with our child, like Brian can write an angry email and he will be received, you know, like as a male, it's just kind of like, we are so sorry, you know, like, and it's like, and we are very aware of that dynamic, and we frankly use it to our advantage for our children, you know, and it's just kind of like, if he's got the privilege, then we will use it, because it's like the way that I am received is not always that. Like there are many times, like, of course, I still speak up and I still say something and I still, you know me, like I'm not going to sit to the side and, let these things happen. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I think that there's also, because I've experienced it my whole life, I also know like when, to pick and choose my battles.
Yeah.
Knowing when to speak up and when it's worth it and when it's just like not, So yeah, that kind of plays itself out with our kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, from both of your perspective, I think just against like, recognize even that there are privileges, it's easier, brands, will be responded differently than the response that you will get, Chioma. But I think I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted here because I feel like, I don't know if the people who are trying to touch our kids here are doing that because they love our kids and they don't know that what it communicates to us. So, but this may be an opportunity for an offline conversation with those child caregiver or school or in places of worship. So I think that would be important because I remember how often like Alison used to be frustrated when people were touching my hair as a grown-up, in church and playing with that, but again, I don't know if it was out of affection or I was not touching their hair, I was just wondering if it's just, I can play with you, you just like, a big teddy bear or I don't know. But again, this is work for an offline conversation. Yeah. Again, it's very beautiful even like to continue as you guys are merging your cultures. So I was just wondering like, what have you learned, Brian? You mentioned like you didn't grow up in Nigeria. Chioma, you grew up here, you were born here. So what have you guys learned, but, you still have your differences, even if you were born here, Chioma. So I was just wondering, like, what have you guys learned about each other's culture, whether it's communication, celebration, hospitality, any kind of family value or social values?
Well, first, I think I had to realize that there was several layers of difference that Chioma and I had. Part of it was that her family's from Nigeria and mine is from the US. But then it was also that there was a regional difference at play. So her experience of growing up in New York versus mine growing up in the Midwest in Missouri also affected both of us. And so I had to kind of start realizing, like, at first I would attribute a lot to her family. And then I started to realize, oh no, that's not her family. Her brother is like this. Like, oh, this isn't even just a region. This is just Chioma. This is the way she is. So there was a lot of that I think I had to learn. One of the big ones that comes out for us is communication and how we communicate. So I was thinking about a way to explain my family. My family is from the Midwest, and when we used to have Christmas, they would give presents to each other. But my family so badly didn't want to disappoint someone if they gave them a bad present that they would hide the bad present under their bed or in the closet somewhere and never tell a person. They would just hide the present somewhere so that way the person wouldn't feel like they had given them a bad gift. So my family was very indirect and would go very, very far out of their way not to embarrass someone. And so there was a value there. It was an extreme value. And I think what I realized with Chioma is that she was very conflict assertive. She was very sometimes she was not afraid to embarrass you. And so I started to realize, like, this is very different than me. But I mean, I think I always say about Chioma, the thing that you love the most about someone oftentimes is the flip side of what bothers you the most about them. So I was attracted to Chioma, I think, in part because she spoke her mind. She's brilliant. She's very like forthcoming about what she wants. And you never know, you're never left wondering in the back of your mind, does Chioma just not like me? Like, she doesn't like you. And if she likes you. It's very clear. There's no doubt. And so I like that I always know what's on her mind very clearly. And then at the same time, like I had to really learn to adjust to how direct she was. Like sometimes she would criticize me and she didn't even expect that it would hurt my feelings or that it would cut me really deep. Like, oh man, like I didn't realize you were going to say that about me right there. So yeah, that's one big area, I think.
Yeah.
Wow, that was powerful. So Chioma is not bold to shame people. I mean, she's not shy to shame people. Wow, that's really true. What about you, Chioma? What are some of the differences that you may have noticed or seen in Brian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's probably like similar on like the flip side, you know. So I think that you know, one thing in communication that I noticed about him and I did not value until we've been married, honestly, was that he like when we're in conflict, you know, or like we're in a fight, like Brian, like he values peace, like he values kindness, like these are all the things that I like really fell in love with about him, like, you know, a really gentle and kind man that he is, you know. And so like even in conflict, like when we're like really mad at each other, like Brian still values just, you know, like even if we haven't worked it out, being like cordial with each other or something, you know, like this, like I still don't really understand it. Like, it's like you know, just being like, oh, like how's your day? Like even if like we're still in a fight, like, you know, before I would be like, what do you mean how's your day? I'll tell you how my day is, you know, and like start talking about, you know, but it's like, but if we don't have time to talk about it, if we're both like going out the door, so you know, it's like there's space to kind of like, we're going to talk tonight about this and work this out, you know. That that's just a value of his that like I just didn't really have. Like in my family, we just hash it out, you know, take the time and hash it out, you know, family meeting, hash it out. But like, you know, it's something I've come to value, and I think it's become part of our family culture over the years. Like, you know, it's a lot easier for me to do it now. You know, it's easier. We might have a fight and then not be able to talk about it fully until like the next 24 hours because of our schedules, and yeah, can like treat each other kindly throughout the day. And it, you know, it's a value that I have, and like, and also his indirectness. So that is probably from what he shared as well. So
yeah, awesome. Well, I just feel like by listening to you guys, I feel like you guys are telling my story with Allison. I think we're very similar, you know, where, you know, for us, if we are not direct, we are not truthful, you know, in Africa. And I think Allison is more, like you say, Brian, going an extra way, not to embarrass someone, you know, peace at all costs, kind of. So, but I think it's kind of cool to just, you know, see those similarities. So that's cool. Yeah. Well, I guess like, I think sometimes people, you know, often make a big deal with race. I mean, sure, there is racism, there is stereotypes, but I think like maybe one of the biggest challenge sometimes is more like a blend of culture. I mean, we know the history of our nation. You know, there was segregation into like the 60s, you know, into the Supreme Court passed the act that you could interracially marry, you know. So I think we had like the Black culture being developed and the white culture being developed in just respective corners. And I think the challenge today is not because, you know, people are different by their skin tone, but it's more like those differences are more direct, you know, you're less direct, or, you know, navigating the privilege card, like, oh, when you send an email, this is the response that we get, a positive, you know, and I think it's kind of like, where am I going with this? Yeah, I was just wondering, like, how can we use maybe our cultural differences, you know, to share maybe, I mean, we know like there's power in diversity, you know, diversity is a superpower. So I think it's so much better to have two different perspectives on an issue, to address, like, whether it's racism or other things. So how are you guys seeing, like, your two culture, or as a potential solution to uh, the problem of our nation here?
No, I don't think about trying to solve racism in our marriage. That's not what you're asking. You're asking, like,
how do we use our culture as gift, to promote more unity? Because I think it's all about cultural differences. It's not about, skin tone. So I think it's maybe more so, because I think, when you guys start dating, I don't think you were thinking of Chioma as a Black woman, but you were thinking more of, like, her culture, what was attractive to you.
So let me think. I think the first time I ever left the US, they talked about when you were having one group of people encountering a group of another people, that there's two tendencies that people usually use to try and solve the problem encountering difference. And they talked about alienating or assimilating. And so assimilating, obviously, is kind of throwing away yourself to try and become like the host, or like, and alienating is saying, like, I'm just incompatible with this person because of the differences, so I'm going to bail on them. And I think there's a lot of ways that could play out. Like, maybe we could appropriate or steal someone's culture to try and make it our own, and I could try to act Nigerian. But that's kind of weird. And I think even outside of a marriage, when people try to just steal culture rather than appreciating it, it's weird. So I think some lessons that you learn inside of marriage are very helpful in the world outside. And obviously alienating from someone and saying, like, we're just not compatible as neighbors is also a problem. But there's real work to do. The alternative that they presented to us was say, oh, how do you learn to integrate or appreciate the other? And I think, for us, there's clearly values. Like, I don't think that indirectness is perfect, or the way that I was raised is perfect. And part of who Chioma is and her directness, outspokenness, made me realize, like, oh, I can resolve conflict and not just bottle it all up inside and suppress myself. Right. So it's so wonderful to me. I love that. Obviously, we still have conflicts and challenges, and it's hard. But I think to me that's been a helpful way of thinking about difference. Is realizing, like, we're not losing ourselves. We're not just going to alienate from each other. We have to figure out how to really, like, be together and appreciate each other, and understand each other.
That's cool. And Chioma, I don't know if you want to add to this, or if you want me just to go to the next question.
Oh yeah, I can add. I think the appreciation piece does feel important, and I think it does help me, the diversity within our marriage, kind of like, it has helped me have another very different perspective, like, as I leave, there are ways that I think I've been able to communicate with people with a similar background as him, in like work situations and social situations. I've learned a lot, and it's probably the case for him too. So I think appreciating the cultures, and yes, like, race is socially constructed, like we could go down that path, like, but it's, I think that, like, race does need to be acknowledged for what it is and how it's been, how it's impacted so much. But yes, like, recognizing the cultural differences that we have and kind of like dealing with those and appreciating those in each other.
Yeah.
Do I have a moment to add one more thing, Emmanuel?
Yes, sir.
So related to what Chioma just said, I think as much as that model that I just described does come at it from two equal footing stances, I think one thing about myself, and I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, but when I realized, like, oh, like, I don't want to see myself as white anymore, that's kind of me realizing that in our relationship, I don't want Choma to appreciate my whiteness. Like, I want her to appreciate my ethnicity, and I don't really want her to appreciate my race. Like, my race is a really sad story that was made up by my ancestors to perpetuate white supremacy. So in that sense, I think it's important, when we're thinking about just diversity in general, the whole alienation and assimilation question, I think, is valid. But when race is part of the conversation, I think it's important to realize, for me, in my own experience, it was really helpful to realize, like, I have to let this whole race concept exit my identity. I don't really want to part of this. Like, people will still call me white because I live in the United States, and so I'm not going to object to that. But for me personally, I don't want to make my spouse appreciate my whiteness. That's not really part of my journey.
Well, and I think, like, one of the words that stood out to me, is that word of appreciation. As we're looking at our culture, and I was wondering about this Ubuntu culture. It's like, because of your white culture, Brian, and your Black culture, Choma, or Steve, Latino culture, or Angela, Asian culture, I am who we are. Because of your culture, it shapes my culture. Because all cultures are made by God and equally, and there is value in each of them. So I think maybe are you guys back? I think we both kind of left.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess it's just like this kind of a concept of like Ubuntu, which is more like I am who we are. Like there's so much value because my wife is white, and there's so much value because I'm an African man, So, and I think, like, as we look at cultures from that perspective, I need the Latino culture, I need the Asian culture, I need the Middle Eastern culture for my culture to shine, not to be suppressed, So I think, again, that's where I feel like, diversity is a superpower, and it's same in interracial marriages. So I think it's kind of like where I will, I encourage people to focus more on cultural, like celebration more. So, yeah, because I think one of the arguments that people sometimes use, they say like having biracial, interracial kids is not a good idea. So what's your take on that? I mean, you have kids and you love them. They're beautiful. They're awesome. So what do you have to say about people who are concerned? I mean, what are the blessings? I get a better question would be, let's be positive here. What are the blessings of having interracial kids?
Well, we can go with your first question.
This confrontation.
So I at first I was like, because like we have kids and of course we love them and think they're like the best thing ever. So like, I don't agree with that statement, but one thing as Black people in the US, especially like Africans, like two African parents, like there is a reality of like recognizing that when I was marrying Brian, it's like I'm marrying, like, my child will not be 100% Nigerian, and like, and the acknowledgement of that, and the acknowledgement of like, I love this culture and I love like my parents' culture. And like, there was like, some real, I think it's important as like, particularly as a minority marrying into like, European whiteness, like, to recognize like, oh, there is something that I'm losing here, and like, and, that was something that we openly talked about. And, I think that there's something legitimate there about like, oh, that's like difficult. I don't know. I know that there are like some pretty racist arguments about, like kids having two different, biracial kids coming from biracial couples that I just think is ridiculous and very old, an old way of thinking. I literally don't even know if it's worth arguing.
Yeah, but Choma, just back to it. I mean, I I think for me the way I think about it is like I don't think like marrying someone who is white make me feel like there is a loss,
No.
into like having a child who may not be 100%, black. I think I see it as like uniqueness, you know. So
Definitely. Yeah. And I definitely do too. Like I think it's like, I mean, I think I'm trying to be as brief because of the sake of time, but like, I'm kind of, I don't, I hope it's obvious that I don't see it as a loss. Like,
yeah,
but, I think that there, as we think about our culture and like, how much has been lost, like in the kind of Black American story, there is a desire within the Black community to build up the Black community, and I think that that's a legitimate kind of desire, and a legitimate thing. And I think that, obviously, like you don't control who you fall in love with or who God brings into your life. And so like, I'm very happy with our, decision and our love. But like, I think that that's a conversation that like we have and we recognize is real for minority communities, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a loss to have a baby. Like, I love my. It's so, like, hard for me to even wrap my head around like what someone would be thinking. I think there might be some things, like some loss, like on your parents' part. I don't know if you think about that, but like if you'd married a Nigerian man, then maybe their ability to speak to him in Igbo would have been there, but that was lost when you chose to marry me. Or maybe to be able to talk to their in-laws, like my parents, or like travel to Nigeria with them, or to know like extended family in Nigeria. That would have all been there if you married an Igbo man. So I think there's sacrifices that you make when you marry cross-culturally. And there's cost, but I mean, to me, like, the wonderful person of my child is such a huge blessing in my life. It obviously very much just feels like one big joy in that respect. Yeah,
thank you. And I think I think the word sacrifice sits better with me, versus losses. I mean, sacrifice are not necessarily like losses. Sacrifice sometimes yield to greater results. As athletes, you have to train hard to be stronger or faster or whatever the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And I think for us, choosing to, for me, like, we face the same challenges of language, or culture. Like Camila is not going to have a certain upbringing that I had, growing up in Wakanda, but yet, she has much more other opportunities here that I didn't have. So it kind of compensates itself. And I think it's, just something beautiful. But so I guess the second question was more like the second part of that question. Thank you, Choma, for taking them into, so I think was more like, what are some blessings, of having interracial kids?
Definitely. I mean, I guess, it's really fun with, what Brian said about just, I appreciate about him that like, he knows his background and he knows his culture, so like, so when I see Samuel, or I see our baby Niam, I'm like, wow, like he has some German in him. Like that's just, there's something about that that's very like I don't know, just like complex and cool, and just like recognizing like all of these like countries, because I obviously like I think on a daily basis I see my children as Black, and in society they will be seen as Black. I think we know that. But, just like within our family unit, just like realizing like, oh, you have, European descent, like in you, and like, and exploring what that means, and seeing Brian be a dad in a way that I didn't see growing up is just really fascinating and cool. And I think like it brings kind of a diversity of experience to me in seeing his strengths as a dad towards our kids. So like things I just wouldn't have thought, like, oh, this means dad.
Wow. So I just feel like we should have more virtual tea on Zoom. Because I can just echo all what you're saying with, the way Camila has been blessed, the things that Alison does. And I'm like, my mom would have never thought about this, whether it's reading stories or I'm like, what is this? What page of a curriculum is this from? This has no part in the Wakanda curriculum. So I guess like there are those, positive blessings. Thank you. What about you, Mr. Brian? What are some positive some blessings that you see with interracial kids?
Yeah, it's hard to parse them out in my mind. Like you enjoy your child for so many different reasons. I guess I had to stop and think about it for a moment. To me, I think like cultural identity is a question of belonging and like where do you can belong. So for me, the fun part of my children is that they can belong to several different worlds fluidly, and they don't even question that. Like, of course, he belongs to his Igbo grandmother. And of course, he belongs to my parents who live here in St. Louis. We're from the Midwest. And so he's with them. He likes to eat chocolate chip pancakes and go fishing. And, that's just part of life. And like with Choma, it's been fun watching some of her influence in him. So like one time, Samuel was sitting at the table and he said something like, can men be lawyers too? And I stopped for a moment. I was like, yes, men can be lawyers. Your grandpa's actually one. Like in his mind, like he'd only seen Choma, and Choma had been full of this driven, career-driven person, and that's one of her values playing out, and life playing out around him, and that was a big joy to me, I think. So you're kind of giving yourself away, and then with Choma and I, when we got married, we wanted to have adventures together. Part of that was living overseas. And since we come back, half of Samuel's life was in Japan. So sometimes he's still kind of working out his own identity. And he'll say things like, like they aren't from Japan like us. And so he feels some sense of belonging still to Japan. And like when I asked him what his special treat was when I started teaching him to play cello, I played cello. So I was really happy when he started playing cello. I was like, what do you want for your special treat? And he said, soba noodles. I really want soba noodles, which was something he had all the time in Japan. And I was like, so different. Like, I didn't want soba noodles growing up. When I wanted ice cream or something. That wasn't what I was growing up. But to him, like, he's like, oh, of course. Like, why wouldn't I want soba noodles? It tastes good. And, he has all these, like, his palate is still very adjusted to Japanese food. But he hasn't really liked much American food since he's been back. There's been some exceptions, but anyways, that's been the fun part for me, is that he just fluidly moves between these communities right now, and I've really enjoyed watching him do that.
Wow, that's very cool. And I think, like, again, as we trying to touch on those gains, from culture, like even food, and just like, travel, I think that's probably the greatest gift you can give a child, just to expose him or her, to different cultures and to let them just like take as much as they can. And I think also like, kids are just so absorbent of culture, like we teach our kid here. She speaks like even my mother's language, not French, but like my mother's language. She will use words like that. But I think if Alison was married to someone from a similar background, I don't think she would have had the opportunity of learning at least two languages, and funny and cool to see how she challenged me sometimes. She would ask me, Papa, what's this word in French? And I'm like, I don't even know a word in French. So I have to go look it up. Like look at a 3-year-old who is like, checking my French knowledge. And, so I think it's just like, I think it's beautiful and unique. Unfortunately, society just focus on like skin tone, as to define someone's identity. But I think identity is more than a skin tone. Maybe that should be a hashtag. We know there is so much like culture and knowledge and history, and we're trying to give as much of the African culture as we can, here in the US. But again, so I think there is definitely, biracial kids are unique, and I guess they have two cultures. It's not like I'm only Black African. It's like, no, maybe by physical feature they may look more that way, but culture is not on the appearance. It's more, like an iceberg, like we always say. Most of the culture is on the, so I think again, like one thing that I would just encourage interracial, families is just to continue to educate themselves and educating their kids and not to throw out their culture. Because again, I think, I don't know, when I see biracial people even just taking picture, that contrast, to me it's so cute, like you don't have the same, and yet Choma, when we choose to marry cross-culturally, one of my questions has always been like, why am I going to go to a buffet and eat what I already have? Like, that was my reasoning, like marrying into the African culture. I was like, well, I'm already African. I already know this culture. If I want to enhance my cultural awareness and growth, it would be good to be exposed to another culture. So I've always been open-minded about other cultures, just because I felt like I'm not saying that those who are married to the people from the similar background are losing, but I just feel like you're limited, like you said, Choma, you have learned how to be indirect in your communication in certain settings, things that you may have not been aware otherwise. So I think again, like that Ubuntu, culture is like, I am who we are, because you're Black and because I'm white. That's why I am Black and you're white 100%. And the kids are just unique. So I guess like, this is a cross-cultural smoothie. So I'm going to ask you to give me your last sip here. And in terms of advice, because we say like advice is like a fire, something that you don't keep for yourself. You have to pass it around to other people. And, joy is never completed until it's shared. So what advice do you guys have for folks who may be thinking, about dating cross-culturally, or even like family members who may have, like in-laws, interracial in-laws? So what advice do you guys have for them? And if not, it's totally okay. You're not paid to produce advice.
No, I haven't. I would say, like, as a minority, like thinking about it, like, obviously there's so many other cross-cultural pairings that are not just like minority and majority culture people. But I would say, like, if you are thinking about a relationship with majority culture person, like, I think it's important to recognize and explore, like, part of like what it means to not marry in your own culture, like, because like I've been uncomfortable with like, people that have like kind of joked with me, like, what I'm saying. Okay.
I was gonna say that.
Okay. Thank you. Good. We're on the same page. So,
don't say this is live. Once he's gone, you can recover.
I'm gonna say it. It is that, like, when Black females have approached me and have been like, so like, what did you do to get a white guy? Like, and I'm not comfortable with that question because like, I really wasn't seeking out a white guy, you know, like I was seeking out somebody that would love me, that would treat me as I am worth, like that would treat me as good as I deserve. Someone that would respect and love my family. Like when I thought about bringing Brian home, like I can't think of anyone else that I've like dated or, you know, been talking with that I would want to bring to my family. The level of respect that he shows my family and how much my family loves him, like all of that. Like I was looking for all of these qualities that like Brian met, you know, like I was not seeking out a white man. And so I think like asking yourself, like, why would someone that asked me that, I would ask you, why are you looking for a white male, you know? And it's like, and what stereotypes are you believing about whatever culture you're about to date? What stereotypes are you believing about them that are not true and not a good reason to seek out a specific culture, you know? So I think seeking out a specific culture to date is just kind of, I mean, it's kind of weird, like, but like, if you're someone that wants to stay within your culture, like, I think that is a whole nother, you know, that's different, but like, you know, just wanted to address that as something to, you know, be careful of. I think like if you've explored your motives and like know yourself well and know what you're looking for and are open to, you know, the spectrum of like races and people, I think that it's a great thing to like open yourself up to a cross-cultural relationship. You know, like I've learned so much more than what I would have learned marrying somebody that was just like me, you know, like it's been a super rich and wonderful experience. So I would encourage people to think about it long and hard because it's not easy. Like we work, we work hard at our relationship, but it's like it's just so worth it and so rich and so good. And I love being in this relationship.
Yeah. I'm just taking some mental notes here, and of course I have a recording. Thank you, Chuma. You guys are just like a walking curriculum. You know, every time I should, you know, put together a conference and having you guys as the speakers.
Well, we would come. So
that's right.
Oh yeah.
We got your back.
Thank you. What about you, Mr. Brian? What are some word of wisdom that you would like to share with
Yeah, I think the why question is important regardless of who you're dating. I was thinking of the same thing because I mean I think we kind of were lucky in some respect that like the whole like phone dating world wasn't really popular. We got to know each other,
glad I
and we happened to be neighbors.
We lived across the street from each other. Yeah,
I think before I met Choma, I had all these thoughts, and I was like, how am I going to meet people? Like, I don't like going to bars. Like, there's so many people, like in like
the whole body.
Like, there's only so many people, like in like a place of worship or a church. Like, if like those 10 people who are in my age group like don't happen to be the person I want to marry, like, how am I going to meet this person? Like, do I just like ask for introductions or like, what do I do? Like, I had a lot of thoughts like that. But I think it really only takes meeting one person. I mean, it may not be the person that you have in your mind. So like when people come and tell you like, oh, this is my type, I'm already a little bit skeptical. Like, well, why? Like, why is that person your type? Like, why do they need to look like this or act like that or that sort of thing? Maybe you should let yourself be a little surprised by who might actually be good for you. And I think maybe along with that, getting to know your own family history and your family of origin goes a long way in understanding your own relationship with your spouse. So if you know, like, what were the kinds of things your parents were dealing with and their parents, what were they dealing with? Because sometimes those things, I imagine it almost like a little bit of a train barreling down at you. And when your family's kind of delivering you their own experiences and you've experienced some of it yourself. And so, I mean, I went to counseling a couple times before I ever got married. And I think it was really good for me. It was really helpful to understand my own family. And it gave me a lot of tools to be able to start understanding Choma when I asked questions about her family. And since society, as a white person, most people don't tell you how to explore your ethnicity and your race, to understand your family. That can be a good first place to start.
Definitely.
Saying like, well, who is my family? Like, why do we act like this? And what does that have to do with my ancestors? Like, all those questions come out when you think about your family of origin.
Well, that's a lot of wisdom, and more wisdom coming from the other room. Well, thank you guys. And I think maybe what I would like to add, as my wisdom here is just like kind of what Choma said, you always gain from other perspective, and I think another blessing is that, in our case, if we feel like Camila has two homes now, she can go to Africa and that's, it will be home for her. She can be here. It can also be home for her. But if she was just like, if Alison was, if her dad was like from here, she could have been limited in that also. And so I think there's just a lot of blessings to count more than, again, even with your example, like once you guys were in Japan, it was a total different experience. You were just foreigners. You were not like interracial couple. You were just like a foreigner couple. So I think I would just tell people never to limit themselves to where they are currently. Life is always bigger and farther than where we are. So, well, thank you again, Choma and Mr. Brian and Nihi in the background, needing his dad. So
here.
Oh, there's Nihi. Can I touch his hair? Well, I think we just have to pause here to adore him, The prince is here, so we all need to lay and bow. So, Brian, thank you so much.
No, we call them Prince 1 and Prince 2.
Oh, you call him Prince?
Nicknames.
The nicknames.
Okay.
You knew.
Well, I call it like I said, I'm like Choma, I'm very direct. When I say Prince, I call him a Prince. Thank you so much, guys. And again, thank you all for to all the viewers there. I just want to remind you again, like if you have a question or if there is a topic that you would like to discuss, please send it to us like here at the culturalsmoothie@gmail.com, and we'll be glad to talk about it. But again, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Choma, and this is the end of our broadcast for tonight. And the Prince, thank you, Prince, for letting your parents join us tonight. You'll be our next guest. Thank you, Brian. Good night, guys.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.